Okay, I will call the meeting to order. It is 7:00 p.m. on Thursday, May 9th. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Calmack.
Here.
Gonzalez. Here. Mason-Jack. Here. Lonzo.
Here.
Novak. Here. Pelletier here. Suzo. Here. Right, but the guest, Swanson, who was our new trustee. You're supposed to be the guest. There is a change to the agenda. We're actually going to move the audit presentation to right now, so that way, well, Brian, you're welcome to stay for as long as you'd like. So Brian
Lefevre.
Makes it easier. Lefevre is here, so everyone should have gotten a couple of pamphlets prepared for our audit report.
All right. Well, on behalf of SIC, I'd like to thank the President and members of the board for inviting us to present the reports resulting from the audit for your year ended December 31st, 2018. I have prepared some comments for you first on the annual financial report. So if we're going to grab the annual financial report, we're going to go past the table of contents to page 1. You'll see it's on SIC's letterhead. This is where we give our opinion on the financial statements. In order for us to give an opinion on the financial statements of the library, we're required to follow two sets of standards. One are the auditing standards that tell us the types of procedures we need to perform when we're conducting our audit, and those are issued by the AICPA, the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants. And then the other entity that governs our standards is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They put all the standards together for what the financial statements need to look like for a local government such as yourself. So once we follow, those two sets of standards, we can then give an opinion on the financial statements. We're pleased to present an unmodified opinion, and what that means is that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, free of material misstatement. And this is the highest level of opinion that you can receive on your financial statements. So in the opinion, I'm going to have you turn to page 2 just for 1 second. The second paragraph there was a new, I talked about those GASB standards. So there's a new GASB standard that was effective this year, where an actuary calculated your potential liability related to retiree health insurance. And that's a new standard that all local governments have to adopt this year. Essentially, all that standard says is that when someone retires under IMRF, you're required to allow them to stay in your health insurance plan when they retire. They pay their own costs. But GASB says there's a implicit liability with that, in that your premiums might become higher because you have retirees in your plan. So we can agree or disagree on that. It's not a liability that you're going to fund. It's just you make your monthly premium payments. It's just a liability that GASB requires you to record. It's different than if you think about your MRF plan and your IMRF plan. You're trying to pay down that liability, and you've been very successful in doing so the last few years. The markets have done well, and so you'll see that those liabilities have gone down. This is one of those liabilities that's on the books, but it's not something you're paying down. And that makes it very hard to understand. If you turn over to page 3, getting into the financial statements themselves, the statement of net position is what I like to call a global view financial statement. It takes all of your assets, including your capital assets like the land and the building here, and all of your liabilities, including long-term liabilities such as your net pension liability for MRF, IMRF, are included in that non-current liabilities due in more than 1 year. So that $2,934,000 includes $2.6 million for MRF, $178,000 for IMRF, and then that new GASB 75 liability of about $103,000. You did have a loan that was still open at the end of 2017. You paid that off during 2018. We'll see that on the financial statements as well. So this statement, along with page 4, the statement of activities, are two statements that are required to receive that unmodified opinion, but it's not really how you operate. How you operate is if we look on page 5, the balance sheet, so you basically have two funds. You have your general fund and your special reserve fund. And on the balance sheet, we're just seeing current assets and current liabilities, so we don't see capital assets, we don't see long-term liabilities. So we're really focusing on those types of assets and liabilities that are convertible pretty quickly into cash. So once you collect on your receivables and pay off any payables you have, fund balance is what the difference is, which are your reserves. So what were your reserves to start the fiscal year that you're operating now? Your general fund was $1,193,000. You see that at the bottom of the page, 2 lines up, on the far left-hand column. And then your special reserve fund was a little over $114,000 at December 31st. Page 7 then is the revenues, expenditures, changes in fund balances, or an income statement. It shows the changes during the year and then what your fund balance was at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. So if we focus on your general fund, operating fund, you have $3,510,000 in revenue, $3,202,000 in expenditures, and you can see that debt service principal was the payoff of that loan was the $50,867 that I referenced before. So you had an increase in your fund balance of $308,000 before you transferred dollars over to the special reserve. That increase tells you that you're operationally in balance, meaning that your structure is such that the revenues that come into the library cover the cost of the operations of the library, and that allows you then to begin to save some dollars into your special reserve fund. So $38,676 was transferred over to the special reserve. So you had an increase in fund balance for the fiscal year of $269,000. So you started at $923 and got back to the $1,193,000 that we saw on the balance sheet. That's how the accounting statements talk to each other. And your special reserve then we can see was the $114 that we saw on the balance sheet as well. Within the notes to the financial statements that begin on page 9, note number 1 is about significant accounting policies. So all the accounting policies that are used to prepare the financial statements that we just went through is what you'll find in note 1. I'll have you turn over to page 15, which is in the middle of note 2. Top of page, note 2A, talks about custodial credit risk. Custodial credit risk is the risk that if one of your financial institutions that you have deposits at goes out of business, would you get your money back? And the answer to that question is yes, and that's part of the test that we do in our audit is to make sure that all your deposits are either covered by FDIC or collateralized. And you remedied one of the institutions that was not fully collateralized at the end of last year, early in this year. In fact, by the time we were sitting here talking about it, it was already remedied. So that's all in good order, and you're doing exactly what you are required to do under your investment policy. So good news there. Let's look at a little more detailed information. If we turn to page 32, you're going to see a little more detailed information about the general fund activity for the year in some categories here that shows the budget as well. So when you look at the budget, you can see total revenues were budgeted at $3,427,000, and actual revenues came in at $3,510,000. Expenditures had the same budget, and you were able to stay under those at that budget at $3,202,000. So that's how you were able to have an increase of $308,000 prior to the transfer of the special reserve. So then if we look at page 33, this is the beginning of the information related to the pension plans. So page 33 is the information related to IMRF. So this shows you what you were required to put into IMRF, and you pay that in monthly, 4.5% from the employees plus the library share, which for the year was just over 9.16%. You can see that in the far right-hand column. The budgetary impact was $109,000. IMRF's a very well-funded plan because each and every government that participates in IMRF is required to put in based on what the actuary determined for their particular entity, how much they need to fund. And everyone has to do it. So makes it a very well-funded plan. If we look at page 34, so the library participates in IMRF through the village because IMRF does not recognize municipal libraries as their own separate local government, but rather you have to participate with the village itself. So then what happens is when the actuaries do their calculations, they do a calculation for the village, the library is included in the village, and then the auditor for the village, along with us, the auditor for the library, have to determine how much of that liability is going to get reported on your financial statements versus on the village's financial statements. And that's done via comparing the payroll, the salaries for the individuals in IMRF from the library versus the village to come up with that percentage. So your percentage allocation was 27.59%. You can see that on page 34. So your portion of the total liability then, or the net pension liability, was $178,000. And if you think about, some will say, what percentage is our pension funded? They're saying the assets in the plan divided by the liability, how funded is it? And you were at 90.65% funded, up from 78% in 2016. So, and in looking at that information in that actuary report, 2017, the markets, the investment markets were a banner return. IMRF's assets returned 16 to 17% in 2017. Now, for those of you that pay attention to the markets, at the end of 2018, the markets did not do very well, so we're not going to see similar results. But going into a year that ended up being a challenging year, at 90.65% funded, in very good position going into that. Now, if we play that out further, as we sit here in 2019, all of the losses that happened in 2018 all rebounded in 2019. So one bad investment year doesn't hurt you so much in IMRF, because what they do is they take the average of the investment income over 5 years to determine how much you need to fund. So it's not like you're going to have funding like this when investments, markets, go up and down from time to time. It would only be if you had, say, 3 out of 5 years and the markets were bad, then everyone's going to be paying a little bit more. So your on page 35, your contribution for the MRF plan is also determined by an actuary, and your contribution in 2018 was just over $197,000. The activity for MRF, which goes through the on page 36, which goes through the 12/31/17 valuation, your total liability, the first double underscore is $3.3 million, and your assets in the plan were $649,000. For the net pension liability of $2.6 million, so it's 19.7% funded as of December 31st, 2017. Those are the highlights of the audit report itself. The audit went very smoothly. Between Pam and Blanche, they're very prepared and ready for us when we come out. So the audit went very smoothly, and be happy to answer questions that you might have.
And the other young lady that came with her to be commended, because they came out on the coldest day of the year.
That's right, it was during that period, yeah.
Blanche and I actually could be closed that morning, but we were here, so we were dedicated.
That's
And they
good.
came out.
It helps, it helps.
And we had some cold ones this year, that's for sure.
Could I ask a question? On the IMRF, it's
Yep.
on 2018, it's 109,000, that's a required contribution, and for the MRF, it's 197, but isn't there more people in the IMRF?
So the 197 is funding more of a prior liability than, in other words, kind of playing catch up a little bit for that. It's not so much that there's a lot of current employees in there, it's that there's retirees in there
Okay,
that you're funding.
so there's more.
Correct. So your benefit payments or pension payments for 2017 coming out of MRF was 180,000. So that 197 is just covering those benefit payments. But you're exactly right, the majority of your current employees are in.
But we have more retired employees in MRF, so
Correct.
that's why that's higher, okay.
are still in Murph.
Right, I know that, and that's why I was asking, because it didn't
Yep, yeah.
take into consideration the ones that are already retired.
Exactly.
Got it.
Now, if I recall correctly, in 2016, you had some folks take buyouts out of Murph.
Mhm.
So that's what depleted the asset balance in there, but helped you long-term from the standpoint of you didn't have to continue paying those benefit payments because they took a settlement on those.
Okay, Kevin just you to.
Right,
I didn't know
right,
if it was a
yeah.
very big one because you've been here so long and participated so long, so.
Good question. The other document is our required communication to the board. So this document includes, beginning on page 2, our required communication to you from those auditing standards that we talked about. And I've mentioned a few of these already. On page 2, the middle paragraph tells you that your key accounting policies are in note 1, and you didn't change any policies except that you implemented the new GASB standard this year, GASB 75. And then in the next paragraph, it talks about what were some estimates in the financial statements. Like, if you compare and say, I know how much is in my bank account, the library's bank account, that's not an estimate, we know what that number was. What is an estimate is when the actuaries estimate what your liability is for IMRF and for Murph. They're making assumptions about when people are going to retire, when people are going to pass away, in order to estimate those liabilities. So those are key liabilities that are in your financial statements. Page 3 then, we didn't have any difficulties in performing the audits. We did recommend a couple of journal entries that we went through with Pam and Blanche, and Blanche reminded me this week that they needed to get recorded onto your ledger, and so that's been done now as well, so thank you, Blanche, for the reminder. No disagreements with management. I always say if there were disagreements during the audit process, you wouldn't be hearing about it tonight. Like I said, the audit went very smoothly. So, if you turn to page 5, these are, page 5 and 6 are just routine adjustments that happen during the audit. Your books are kept during the year on a cash basis, but then you have to convert it at the end of the year to record receivables and payables. Your books are kept very well on a cash basis, and that's what you're making decisions off of. So you're not seeing adjustments here to cash, which is very important because that's how you make decisions during the year. Should we do this or should we not do this? It's in the budget, we have the funds, and you're getting good financial information throughout the year, so that's very important. If you turn from there over to page 9, as we get to this section of this report, this is where we have any, it's called a management letter, it's where we have any recommendations. And we just had one recommendation related to credit cards, and a very good response that Pam included in the letter itself. There's some new GASB standards. The only one that's even going to affect any of our library clients is leases, and that's only if there's significant leasing going on of equipment and that kind of thing. Otherwise, it probably won't have much of an impact. Some of our larger clients it'll impact significantly. Page 12 then is just the update on the comments from last year's audit. And you'll see that the majority of those comments were implemented as well. So the year-end close is still applicable, but there's a reliance on us to help with that. This is just a reminder to say, that some of those things are just assumed in our standards that all of our clients are going to do, but that's oftentimes the case. We do need to help with those. I had mentioned uncollateralized deposits on page 13 was implemented this year, and then our recommendation on the cash receipts was implemented as well. So those are the highlights from this document. Happy to answer questions.
Any questions? thank you so much for coming out.
You're very welcome. And as always, enjoy working with the library, and Pam's always, and between Pam and Blanche, they contact us a lot during the year, which is a really good thing. Because then we make sure that, that we get questions answered, which is our job. But then also, if there's unique transactions, they get recorded correctly the first time, which is really important. It saves all of you a lot of time and avoids any confusion with doing that, so. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Brian.
We'll be in touch.
Thanks, Ann.
Nick had indicated Blanche is retiring this year.
Oh.
And so I'm probably going to be reaching out for some guidance and advice and perhaps some assistance moving forward.
Absolutely.
As we kind of look at the next steps for that position and that kind of thing, so. yeah.
Congratulations, Blanche.
Thank you.
Is there an actual official day, or does it keep moving?
He keeps moving.
Got it.
Towards the end of the year, but we're still.
Perfect. Yeah, so just let Nick and I know when you want to, happy to do that.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks so
Great.
much.
Thank you very
Brian.
much.
Thanks, Brian.
Have a good night.
All right. So we'll move along to the approval of the regular board minutes for April 11th, 2019.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the regular board meeting, April 11th, 2019. Second. I just had a question, after the meeting was called to order, should we say the president pro tem would know it?
By President Novak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, President.
At her meeting.
Yeah,
So
that's
you're
the
saying-
name.
Blanche, you see where that is?
Third line on the minutes, just add Barb's last name, that she was the president that night.
Okay. Oh. So just to say the meeting was called to order at 7 PM by President Pro Tem Barbara Nolan.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can.
Thank you.
Any other questions, corrections?
All those in favor of approving the minutes from April 11th, 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Next, I'll make a motion to approve the executive session minutes from April 11th, 2019.
One second.
Questions, comments, concerns?
All those in favor of approving the executive session minutes? Oh, probably. Where? Session adjournment was made by President Pro Tem Novak.
Probably is less important there because she is named at the top where it says President Pro Tem Novak.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably, I mean, we can, but then we won't be able to sign this tonight. But since she's named it, specifically at the top, I think we're probably fine.
Works for me. All those in favor of approving the executive session minutes from April 11th, 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Public comments?
Nick, you're officially public. Do you have anything you want to comment on yet?
I don't think so.
Okay. President report, I don't have anything. So next we have committee reports. Finance is up, yes.
Okay, I'll do it again. I'll make a motion to approve the financial reports for April 2019.
Second.
Okay, are there any questions, comments? Let's start with the cash statement. And you'll notice the PMAs in the back.
Just a
Yeah, I
question
like
that I
that.
know the answer to. Since the bank has been sold, does that make any difference in this? Do we have to identify that?
Well, when, next month we will, we'll probably just take out the name of the bank, just list
That's
operating.
what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Because it didn't happen officially till May.
May, it was May.
Yeah, that happens in,
Yeah.
happens in May. I usually-
I did the wrong one.
Yeah,
That's because time goes
Yeah,
by
it
so
was,
fast when your money
it
is.
took a while to, it's not quite, the transition, I'm thinking is not going quite as smoothly as they said that it was going to go,
Telling you,
so.
I
So
spent
time
4
on the phone
hours
this
there,
afternoon,
almost,
did you?
I spent about 2-3 hours
Yeah.
there trying to get my stuff straightened out.
Oh, really?
Partly because I'm not good at computers, and I couldn't.
Yeah, it was
But
very,
but that's, you know, when everything is based on computers, there are a lot of more people like me that
Yeah,
don't get it.
that's hard.
Okay, should we do the income statement? Any questions? Third of the way through and we're at 29%. Third of the way through the year. No questions? And the check register, any questions? Checks.
Can you remember if it was mango languages?
one of our databases for language learning.
Okay.
Could you have a check register?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
there's one,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure because it was another.
That's it? No questions? Okay, that was easy.
Okay, we'll approve the financial report, starting with invalid.
Here.
Yeah. for-
Yes, Barbara.
Jack?
Yes.
Monzo?
Yes.
Rowland?
Yes.
Lettieri, yes. Kuzo?
Yes.
Almec?
Yes.
Okay, facilities, did not meet, but I'm thinking that once we have our next two trustees on, we can
Regular schedule.
schedule another
Yeah.
tour and everything. Policy committee did meet, we have quite a few, to approve, but we can, that's, you can see that that's further down the agenda. So we'll get to that, so, staff reports.
You all have a copy of the librarian report, my report. I don't think there's anything I need to add to that. Probably the biggest thing to talk about is 6200, which is another agenda point. Also that, under miscellaneous, I mentioned that I've been spending quite a bit of time working with our Overdrive Consortium and chairing that committee, and so we're getting close to making that transition, but that's taken up a fair amount of my time as well, so. So lots of changes and just lots of changes going on at the library, it's kind of crazy. Staff heads are exploding a little bit, I know, but
Sounded
they've all
like the
been
staff
really great.
presentation was quite appropriate, then.
Yeah, it was, yeah, there's just a lot going on in a very short amount of time through, you know, kind of no fault of our own, just things happen, but everyone seems to be stepping up, and the staff have been really great with that, so we're hoping that things calm down a little bit, but just kind of, we had a department head meeting yesterday, and Courtney saying, she was just reading about the changes. I mean, you know, we went from, you know, some of the staffing changes, joining CCS and a new library catalog system, new computers for staff, new copy machines, we're redoing the website, we're in the process of redesigning a new logo that'll be presented to the board in June for feedback and stuff, but just lots of things that are happening kind of boom, 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 so we're excited, but frazzled.
Yeah.
But excited, and the staff has been great, so.
Is the ECC just to this library, something new for Warren Grove Library, or?
No, it covers almost 100 libraries. So if you're familiar with any of the library's downloadable content, this is, right now, it's called My Media Mall, and that's one of the downloadable services for ebooks and e-audiobooks. Right now, it started back when there were 9 library systems throughout the state, and NSLS, which was the library system that Morton Grove was in. They had a consortium of libraries that joined to purchase this content, on a consortial basis, to get price breaks and those kinds of things. So the systems dissolved, and now there's only 3 systems in the state, and so there was a third party that took over the administration of this service that people have generally been unhappy with over the past several years. There's not been a lot of transparency, particularly financial transparency with the third party, and not a lot of communication, and there were no voting mechanisms put in place. It was a very loosely run consortium, and so it kind of came to a head a few years ago, and so since then we've been working on creating another organization to give all of the member libraries, to have it actually be an official organization. Everyone has signed intergovernmental agreements, we have bylaws, we're in the process of incorporating, and we'll apply for nonprofit status. We've set up voting mechanisms, that kind of thing, and then we've been working just very recently on that transition because our current contract with Overdrive ends. There's some question about the contract termination dates because it's been very loosely run for a decade at least, but so we'll be transitioning away from Libraries First as an administrator of that service to kind of the self-administration model. And so that will happen either end of May or end of June, depending on what the final date is determined. But Rails, the current library system that we're in, the one that kind of subsumed all of the Northern Illinois library systems, has graciously agreed to assist us in whatever manner that we need. They're going to actually be doing the physical billing of libraries and stuff, but they've been very gracious letting us use an attorney on their time to kind of help us through this process as well, because the person in charge of Libraries First has retained legal counsel as well, so there's been some back and forth a little bit with that. And then we also have attorneys from Overdrive, and actually the president of Overdrive is himself an attorney, I believe his wife is as well, and one of their top legal counsel, actually just a few weeks ago, got admitted to practice before the Supreme Court, so they have their own. So anyway, the actual Overdrive, the company, is actually really super supportive of the ECC, so things are moving forward, and but it is another big change for us, but it will provide a lot more accountability to the member libraries, but it does cover, like I said, almost 100 libraries from pretty much central Illinois on up. Quite the undertaking.
How's the addition of Edmund?
Great so far. I actually haven't met him yet.
Oh.
Or are we talking about the adult services admin?
Adult services.
I haven't even met him yet because his first day was when I was in California last week.
Okay.
So, and I haven't had a chance to, I haven't had a chance to actually meet him yet. But he seems to be working out well. One of the issues we're having is, so we're actually, that some of the staff are still on Macs, and we're switching out those computers starting next Friday, I think. So that is kind of, so some of our newer employees, Edmund is one of them, and Sarah and Natalie and YS, even though they're not new any longer, they've still been kind of hobbling along, having the Macs. We didn't want to put a lot of time and effort into making things work exactly right, knowing that we were going to be switching over. So hopefully when that happens, they'll be able to function fully. But he seems to be settling in really well from what Natalia has told me, and we felt, I was in on the interviews with them and stuff, and I think he'll be a great addition to Great Libraries. So.
You have Edmund, and then our facilities guy, Edmund.
Edmund. So we call facilities Ed, and Edmund goes by Edmund.
Okay,
so.
well that's easier.
Yeah, right. Okay. touch with Frank regarding various issues with the, selling of the 6200 Lincoln Avenue building. And things are progressing along, so, he's staying on top of the things from his end and getting no contact when necessary and notifying me, but I think we're moving along.
Which leads very seamlessly into 6200 Lincoln Avenue.
So, do you want us to start?
Yep.
So, we settled on a price for the building, $335,000. I signed the contract, sorry. That seemed like it was going along really well. The buyer had a contractor out a couple of different times. I know that they had spoken with the fire department, I believe, and the village to make sure there would be no issues like the sprinklers and those kinds of things, and that was all fine. And then we kind of came to a screeching halt just a few days ago because of the parking situation. The code in Morton Grove is for every 250 or 56 square feet, I believe it is, 250. You have to have a parking space. Given the size of the building, that means that they would have to have 25 off-street parking places. Obviously, there's very few places in Morton Grove that can accommodate that, this being one of them, or not being one of them. So we had a couple, back and forth emails between myself and Brian Ripp, the broker, regarding potentially some kind of agreement that we would let the buyer use 17 spaces of the spaces that we pay for from St. Martha's, which is not, it's not allowed by our contract, and half of that parking lot is underwater lately, so there's some issues going on with the drainage under that parking lot, so we don't even have enough spaces for the spaces we lease. But it's not allowed by our contract, and I let Brian know that. So I have been in talks, I've been in discussions with the village. Most of my Monday was taken up between talking to Frank and Ralph Sawinski and Brian Ripp regarding this. Initially, the village offered a 35% variance on the parking, which still would require him to have 15 off-street parking places. And then I spoke with Ralph, and I kind of expressed our frustration that we all would have thought the village would like to get this building back on the tax rolls. We really felt like, it almost felt like they didn't want us to sell the building. We felt like there were a lot of impediments to the sale and that sort of thing. And Ralph responded, as he should, they have to look at other things, they have to think about the residents around the building and that sort of thing, and I absolutely understand that. So I have forwarded to Ralph some of the back and forth emails just about what, there's a new planning commission or person planning, I don't know her exact title, at the village, and so,
The land use planner.
Land use planner, yeah, so I have forwarded some of that to Ralph, and so he went and spoke with them. They actually did some searching, some information gathering to find out what neighboring communities, what their parking space requirements were, and Morton Grove is pretty much right in there. So we're not significantly lower than any of those surrounding communities. But the suggestion from the village, and it's a good one, is that the buyer should apply for a special use permit, explain his parking needs, because the other thing about this is that I believe the person buying this building is an investment banker, has some kind of investing firm, and literally will only need 4 spaces. So
4 spaces on the street or in the
no,
lot?
4 spaces total.
Oh,
I mean,
and
there's only going to be
Okay.
like 4 people or something like that, is my understanding, that's what
Right.
he has indicated. So, so basically what he has to do, he has to fill out the special use application, present the planning commission and the village board with a plan, kind of his parking plan and his parking needs. We have to do a couple of things as the seller, which I have to, the 2 things that would be our responsibility is that there has to be a letter of authorization from the seller that we approve this special use application. So I just have to send them that on letterhead, and then provide them with evidence of ownership of the building, because we are still the owners of the building, even though he's doing this because he wants to buy it. I just have to do that, so I can do those two things, and then he will do the special use application. In speaking with both Frank, who was the attorney for the village for a while, and has been operating in the village for a long time, and also with Ralph, neither of them see any reason that the village wouldn't approve that special use permit for them. And we've passed on to the buyer kind of the calendar for the plan commission, and so that they can get their stuff in time, so that this process can move along. One of the things that the buyer did ask for, and I agreed to this, was an extension on the closing date, just so they could go through this process. So we're still working on it. Things I think are pretty positive. The buyer seems very committed to purchasing the building still, so because he is moving forward with the special use, application. So that's where we're at right now. So I believe that he has until May 13th. I don't have the calendar in front of me right now from the Plan Commission. But I believe he has till May 13th to get his stuff in, to get on the calendar for whatever the next calendar date is, so that we can kind of move this along. So our hope is that we will close sometime in August, probably mid-August, or if the special use permit comes through sooner, within 10 days of that. But right now, we're probably looking more closely at in August, or more likely in
Are
August.
the taxes also an issue? Because I know we have a tax record too.
Yeah, he did have some questions about the
Is he okay
taxes.
with it?
I mean, the response is a response. I mean,
Right.
we're a tax exempt. I mean, I think there was some, I don't know that he understood that we were a tax exempt body. And so I think some of the questions that he was asking about the taxes were those that you would typically ask of someone who is just selling the building. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like a commercial entity, for example. So Frank had a really good response to that, basically just saying, the library's a tax exempt, entity, we don't have to pay taxes, that we don't have any sense of what the taxes will be in the future. I mean, no one can tell you that, so, the taxes are gonna be what the taxes are gonna be.
We don't know.
No, I don't think that
That's
would be
not
too much of
It
an
was,
issue.
I believe it would have been assessed because it was a for-profit.
Right, but
Before.
the thing is, and when other people have had questions about the taxes as we've gone through this process now, I mean, we can look back and we can look at what the taxes were prior to 2014, but that's already 5 years old now.
Right,
So,
I realize
so
that.
as we get further and further along, that information becomes less and less relevant because it's just older.
Other than it has measurements and things, whatever they.
Right, yeah, so that's the other thing that we need, that I don't know if we ever got, and maybe you guys as being on the board, if there was a
I remember
survey.
getting blueprints that were pretty useless, if I recall.
Did we get a new one when we bought it?
Did we get a plat survey when it was purchased?
You know who would know that it's Frank?
They probably did though.
I don't know, there's not as much documentation regarding this as one would hope, so.
Maybe a resurvey is not going to be out of the bounds to get a survey either way.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, we can come up with those things. And then Zoe Highorn is her name at the village. She was super nice, and said that she was gonna check their records too, to see what things they might have already had on file. Like they may have a plan of survey on file, and there was another piece of information, or a site plan, a plan of survey. So she was gonna check, because they did mention to her that the previous owner, Malco, did annually apply for a variance to park on the street, to park like 5 or 6
Right.
cars on the street every year. So there may be some documentation that they have that we can use for this as well, so.
Why does he have to apply for a variance when he only needs 4 parking places? I mean, yeah, if somebody comes to his
Because-
office and parks on the street, how
It's
does
a requirement of the village, because they're saying as a buyer, that's what the code says, that's what it says. It's just like if you wanna put a fence up and something, you wanna put a bush that's somewhere, you have to get a variance. If we had to get a permit for the new sign, outdoor sign, so it's a requirement of the village's code. So that people aren't creating commercial spaces that don't have the required parking.
Trying to reduce congestion in the village and anywhere. That's why all the larger spaces have shared parking, like all the larger spaces in the village with
Yeah.
retail.
The problem being is that there's not a lot of places in Morton Grove that have a lot of space like that. So, I mean, if you look at Pequods, for example, they have no parking, you know, that kind of thing.
That's what I'm trying
So
to figure, so they have to apply for a variance?
if they sold their building to someone else who wanted to use it, I mean, they're grandfathered in right now.
Oh.
As are we. Now
As are we.
Okay, so it's
But
a
we're
new
selling it.
ordinance that they.
Or whatever it was, but, you know, since a lot of these
Since we
businesses have
purchased
gone.
it.
The grandfather in gets dismissed because it's a new owner.
Okay, that's why I was
And
getting
to me, that's
confused,
a
it
new
was like.
one. Yeah, and I don't know if the parking regulations have changed.
No, they just like to make.
I mean, I'm not having been here when the building was first purchased, I don't know what the village told the library in terms of, you know, how much parking, but I know that there was a lot of question about doing a traffic study and those kinds of things.
Mhm.
So, you know, these are just, I mean, they're requirements, they're code requirements. The village is, while I was very frustrated on Monday, I have spoken with Ralph a couple times since then, gone in to talk to him as well, and talked to him, I think it was yesterday. The days are just running into one another. He says, you know, he says, have him apply for the special use parking. He says, you know, I'll send you all this information about the calendar so you can make sure that he gets on the calendar so everything's done in as timely a manner as possible. Government is government. Things move a little bit more slowly. The village board needs to meet, just like when we make decisions, you know, that are over a certain dollar amount, you guys need to meet, that kind of thing. So, I mean, we got that. One of the things that he did say to me, which I thought was really reassuring, he says, you know, obviously not having seen his site plan but he says, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't approve this. And he said, and if for some reason this falls through, he says, we will also see what we can do more proactively for a potential next buyer, but fingers crossed that this goes through. So that's the first time that they've said that, but I'm really hoping that this is it. I can't, yes. Fingers crossed. I'm not even telling some of the, I just occasionally will mention something to the department heads and the rest of the staff, because I'll say, oh, we got an offer, and then, you know, 2 weeks it falls apart, so. But like I said, the buyer does seem very committed, is going through the special use process, and that's what it is right now.
They have an agreement on the extension and he wanted the new license to be, the new variance to be transferable, you can't.
That can't be true. I mean, we just said no. I mean, there were some things that we stipulated, we said no, that they weren't gonna go into contract, and because the thing is, you can't really transfer a special use permit, because that's what, it's special use for that particular, you know, person or instance or business or
I mean,
whatever,
it's not
so.
gonna kill the.
I hope not, but it doesn't, I mean, if that's what kills it, there's not really much we can do, because we can't guarantee that.
Well,
And we can't, and we wouldn't ask the village for that.
The only reason I asked is because all the rest of the uses I've seen the code, most of the uses require about 250. I thought there was other conforming use. There's like, it's a 6,300 square foot building, I think it is, around there.
6,200?
6,200.
No, are you asking if that's how much square footage the building is? I think it's like 66.
Okay, so basically gross floor area is what requires 25 spaces. Most of the different uses that could be used for the building, other than residential, require, you know, minimum parking spaces that are not gonna fit in that off-street anyway.
Mhm.
So that's why I was just wondering in terms of if there's something that might end the deal.
I mean, you know, anything could at this point, but we can only do what we can do, and the village is gonna do what they're willing to do. And so, you know, we're trying to ease the way as much as we can and work with the village in order to make sure that this deal goes through. But, you know, on the other hand, we can't guarantee something that we have no control over, so. But, you know, fingers crossed,
I'm keeping
I'm
quiet.
gonna have a big party when it happens, let me tell you. I'm gonna be bringing champagne to the board meeting. Yes. The broker, our broker is a little frustrated too, but he calmed down since I talked to him on Monday.
It's been 2 or 3 years now?
It's been on the market since I've been here, it's been 2 years.
It's been 2 years.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling positive. Right, you're sticking with that. Good. Sticking to
I
it.
wish I could say the same.
Okay, new business, our new trustee.
So would you like to yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
All right, I'm Nick Swanson. I live here in Monroe down in Cali, and got a wife, 3 little boys, come here often. The dean at Notre Dame High School. I teach there as well. The library's always been a big influence on me, I suppose, when I was little to college, grad school, whatever. And my wife and I take the kids here all the time. And my wife works with Julie Justy, whose husband.
Oh, okay.
And she begged my wife to do this.
Oh.
And she wasn't interested.
It became you.
Yeah, and I kind of was, so, I did it, and, here I am.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So we'll actually swear you in at the next board
Great.
meeting, because I have to wait for the
Sure,
the official certified election results, but you've got all the information, and then if you want to set up an orientation where we can talk a little bit more in detail about the library and what the board does and what I do and that kind of thing, so.
All right, so next we have our policy reviews and approvals. So there are several policies.
Ask an overall question, were there changes made?
Yes.
Yes, there were.
Remember-
I will do my best to remember where those were for each policy.
We had talked about possibly doing red or something.
Yeah.
We did talk about that, with wording.
I don't wanna be difficult, but it takes a lot of reading if it's the same, it's the same.
I will tell you the only one,
Not that I don't do this to you all the
you know,
time.
they all have changes to them, and I will, I'll address where those changes were. In terms of actual kind of substantive changes, not so much.
Really
There are a
maybe
couple of
wording
areas, yeah, and there are a couple of areas
And
that
that I
we
don't
can
really care
discuss.
that much.
Yeah.
It's-
So when we get to the ones that have, more substantive changes,
Okay.
I'll
We'll do separate approval for each policy.
pardon?
Separate approval for each policy.
Probably, because you have one more question.
Okay.
in this instance.
All right, well, I'll just start. So, I'll make a motion to approve the children in the library policy. Who's in it? Thank you. I actually think there was actually just a little cleaning up, I think you said. There was actually very little.
Probably the biggest thing is, we did change the unaccompanied minors at closing to mirror what is more our practice. The policy had something that we really couldn't guarantee. There was verbiage about, that we would for sure contact the Morton Grove Police Department to come
Right.
within 15 minutes, and that was really not something that we did very
Yeah, I remember
often unless
that.
it was a really exceptional case. And so we really felt that the policy didn't accurately represent what we do. And so this is, what's on there now is more how we treat unaccompanied minors at closing. We are fairly fortunate, that does not happen very often. What usually ends up happening is that a parent or a person who's picking the child up loses track of time, doesn't realize we're closing at a certain time, say on a Friday, for example, and we're able to contact them and we wait with the child. That's typically what ends up happening, so very, very infrequently would we call the police on unaccompanied minor at closing. But we'd like to have that option if necessary.
Do you have to check with the fire department or police, the police, I mean, that this is something they would do?
Well, that's actually why we took out that we would call, that's part of the reason,
Yeah.
is because they would not give us a guarantee that they would respond to something
Okay.
like that. So that's why we leave it up to the librarian in charge to make that judgment call if they need to contact the police.
That's fine.
And at that point, our librarian's in charge, if it's an evening, for example, would have notified a department head or myself of the situation, and so it would have gone higher up the chain. And because it's rare that we would call the police in this instance, they would then probably come, but they have been very reluctant to give us a firm answer about what they will do if, it's 15 minutes and someone hasn't come. So that's why we want to leave it a little bit more broad, so that it does encompass, what we can do in practice, but still give us backup for policy if parents, abuse that.
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest change in that policy.
Any other questions about the children in the library policy?
The roll call policy.
Yeah, you probably should.
Okay, Mason,
Yes.
Longo,
Yes.
Novick,
Yes.
Pelletier, yes, Puzo,
Yes.
Calmack,
Yes.
Gonzalez.
Yes.
Okay. Next, I'll make a motion to approve the computer and technology use policy.
Second.
I know that you definitely, in the back, there's some change in verbiage just to make that clear. The users may not use the library's equipment or technology to perform any illegal activity or violate any local, state, or
So we took out the word free at the top.
Yes.
The biggest change to the policy actually is that we are starting to filter our YS internet computers. So that is not something that was done before, because with our old library catalog system, we were able to we had access to more granular data about the age of a user based on their library card number. With the new system, that's more difficult to do. So one of the responses to that, rather than, that was not so staff labor intensive, was to install filters on the YS computers. The adult internet computers are still unfiltered. So we're working with OSG, our IT outsource group, to get those implemented. And the YS staff felt entirely comfortable with that, and that gave us the mechanism to continue to, make it as easy as possible for kids to use those computers.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest change to this policy, is that we had to make the change to indicate that the YS computers were not filtered.
And for everyone's reference, under youth computers, where it says children of age 7 must be accompanied by a caregiver, as outlined in the children in the library, where it's italicized there, that links right to the children in the library policy. And then down below, everyone who uses library technology, internet access policy, again, links right to internet access policy, so.
Okay, Longo,
Yes.
Novick,
Yes.
Pelletier, yes, Puzo, Calmack,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Mason,
Yes. And feel free to make motions, I should make all motions.
Right, I'll make a motion to
To
approve the credit card policy.
Do you
One second.
the credit card policy?
No.
Okay. You can still approve it if you want. I can tell you the change to that, and then you can let me know if you're comfortable doing it this month or if you want to wait till next month to actually approve it. And that was my mistake, because I was putting out a bunch more of these and must have missed this one to get to it. The substantive change that I made to the credit card policy was to include a section that staff are not allowed to attach their personal credit card information to any of our corporate accounts. So that in the event that this ever happens
I
again,
think that's a good point.
right, and we'll spell that out. I mean, because it does happen, we have an Amazon account, we have a Sam's Club account, we have a Costco account. So that, and then outlining that, would result in disciplinary action up to and including termination or including termination. We had an employee who's no longer with us that had attached personal credit card information to our corporate Amazon account. which allowed him to purchase things for his own use, but without paying sales tax. So it was,
Not nice.
yeah, so that was, so that, we felt that we needed to spell that out in the policy. So that was a substantive change for that one. I think if you want to approve it, you still can, or if you would like to actually see it in writing, we can wait till next month. That's totally up to the board.
Is anybody here to wait?
No, I mean, I'm fine with it.
We reviewed it.
Yeah, and they did, the policy committee did review that, and they were happy with that as well.
Isn't that gonna be on the handbook as well? You know, like,
Yeah, there is,
is that a new-
I am adding that to the thing is, the credit card policy kind of straddles an interesting, it kind of straddles the line. I mean, it's a policy that we make available to the public. As part of that policy is a form that actually has to be signed by the people who hold credit cards, so the department heads and Blanche and myself, which means that when they sign that, they indicate that they have read the policy and they're agreeing to it. But we'll have to put in the employee handbook the second part about not attaching your personal information, because anyone can do that, that has access to those accounts, and there's a fair number of people. So we'll be making that change in the employee handbook as well. But the policy committee did see the new policy, and I believe it was their recommendation to the full board to approve.
Did anybody second my motion? I missed it. Thanks. Okay, Novik?
Yes.
Pelletier, yes. Puzo?
Yes.
Calvin?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Mason?
Yes.
Lonzo?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve the internet access policy. Seconded.
There weren't really any changes to this. I did remove the word free, and the Warren Grove Public Library provides internet access, and I think it said free wireless connectivity, so we took out free because technically it's not free, you do pay for it through your taxes. And it was kind of awkwardly worded. And then also this, the other change in here just was the change saying that wireless computers were not full.
Pelletier, yes. Puzo?
Yes.
Calvin?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Mason? Yes. Lonzo?
Yes.
Novik?
Yes.
I make a motion to approve the lost damaged materials policy.
Second.
So this has changed fairly significantly, reflecting both joining CCS, now that we're a member of a consortium. We've had to stipulate a little bit more strongly that, you know, we don't determine the cost of fees and charges from other libraries for their materials. The other big thing that this policy does is it removes the processing fee. Currently, if someone has a lost or damaged item and we have to replace that, we charge them a $5 processing fee. We are asking the board to approve removing that processing fee. It's another mechanism to reduce barriers to service, which we felt was really important with eliminating overdue fines. But also because we felt that in a lot of ways it wasn't, I don't want to say fairly applied, but for example, if someone lost a magazine, an issue of a magazine, we're not going to replace that magazine. We would just be withdrawing that and charge them a $5 processing fee. There is an argument also to be made that that this is part of library staff's job to process materials, and in a sense, we're being paid twice, which I kind of agree with. So I am asking the board to approve the revised lost and damaged materials policy, removing that processing fee, though not removing the cost of the item, just the processing fee.
For parties that overdue fines will not be refunded, are we still going fine free?
We are still fine-free for Morton Grove residents for Morton Grove materials.
Okay.
So someone could still have an overdue fine that has been that's still on their record from before we, instituted fine-free. They could have a fine on their record from an item from another library. So we did actually have a long discussion about that at the policy committee meeting as well. So for now, I had suggested to the policy committee that we leave that in there. Over time, as it becomes longer and longer between, you know, that cutover from charging fines to patrons and not charging fines, we may see that that becomes ubiquitous, or not ubiquitous, but like superfluous, and we won't have to have it. But for right now, I felt I was more comfortable leaving that in for now.
Any questions?
Kuzo?
Yes.
Calme?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Longo?
Yes.
Novak?
Yes.
Valtier, yes.
Jeff will thank you very much. So he will be thrilled.
Jeffrey felt really strongly that we should get rid of
Yes,
the
he
$5
did.
process fee. So. Okay. Oh, this is the one I had a hard time reading.
You want me to say? I'll make a motion to approve privacy and confidentiality of patron identifiable information.
See, it doesn't just roll off.
It doesn't.
It doesn't roll off the tongue. It's
So
all
like,
like,
There really was no substantive changes to this. I just moved some paragraphs around to kind of put more like things with like things. But in terms of the substance of the policy itself, there were no changes.
any questions?
Okay, we'll vote. Calme?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Longo? Novak?
Yes.
Valtier, yes. Kuzo? Okay, I make a motion to approve the public services policy.
So changes to this were just kind of cleanup of, making some of the bullet points more concise, removing extra words. Though there was a section added under staff will not, the last two bullet points in particular, those are new, serve as an intermediary between the patron and other individuals or organizations, or represent the patron in any transactions that are not specifically library related. We do somewhat regularly, in an effort to be helpful, can sometimes get sucked into transactions with patrons who then want us to call the Social Security office for them and kind of serve as their intermediary, serve as their agent, serve as their representative. And so there was nothing in our public service policy that prohibited that. And so it made it, we want to be able to give the reference staff the ability to point to the policies and say that there's certain things that they're not allowed to do just because it's not appropriate for the jobs that we do. And it's usually happening at a public service desk where other individuals need assistance, or it's someone's private information that you're now saying on the phone. And as those of you that have been in the library know how much everything echoes. I did add those two items, and that was reviewed by the department heads as well and the public service staff, and they all thought that was a good addition.
Okay, we'll vote on that one. Gonzalez?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Longo?
Yes.
Novak?
Yes.
Valtier, yes. Kuzo?
Yes.
Calme?
Yes.
Okay, next we have trustee recognition, Dr. Kalnick, Barbara. Thank you so much for your years of service to the Morton Public Library. Hopefully you'll come back and visit us if you're ever feeling lonely on a Thursday night.
You might be back next month already.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Callahan.
8 years. More.
And our records say 6 years, so it might have been, we'll have to look at the
Perfectly
timing
okay.
of yours. I want to double check the dates.
I know I started before, but I don't know.
Right, we'll have to
It
look
could
at
have
that.
been 2 months.
Right, and that's because you were looking back at the years, so. I would just like to personally say thank you to both of you, both this time around and last time, for your support of me and the support of the library. It's meant a lot, and I found you both really super supportive and easy to work with.
No reason to complain.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anything, it expanded my mind of what goes on in a library.
Yeah, I think most people,
Not to
until
be
they serve on a
believed.
board, they don't really understand.
This meeting alone, I'm sitting here overwhelmed with stuff I don't understand. Especially the audit reports.
I know.
Money
Yeah.
for kids.
How can you ask a
Signature's
question if you can't figure out what
yeah,
to do?
Signature's really great, and they're great to work with, I know tonight.
I'm glad you
Enjoy
understand.
That's good. Yeah. Okay, so communications, there are a few.
I just included a few things that we've gotten. The first one is about the census and, the Secretary of State asking us to make our computer access available to people as a way that they're going to really be asking people to submit their census count. And then some thank you notes for work the staff has done. Two things I always like to show those to the board, and when I receive these, I usually, let the department head know, the person know, and then they actually go in their personnel files, so that they can be included with their evaluations.
I know last year with the census, the last time of the census, we did something, but I don't remember.
Information.
I made people aware of it.
Had a program that was related to that?
I don't remember the problem so much as a flyer or something.
We do have, we have received some flyers, we've been posting them. I did have a meeting with one of the area census, I don't know what his title was, but, he did set up also a table in the lobby to recruit census workers, and so, when we've been contacted, we try to accommodate them as much
Yeah,
as
I
we
think
can.
it's gonna be more important than.
I think it's
years.
super important, yeah. It's always important, but it feels
It's
extra
always
important.
important, but it's extra important
Yeah, it feels.
when you hear of all the illegal.
You want an accurate count of people that are in the country, so, yeah. So every time that we've heard from them or they request something, we try to accommodate that where we can.
All right, public comments, non-agenda items. Nick, feel like you get your chances. No, all right.
I actually had a question, but it wasn't quite appropriate, it was related to the signage, but not appropriate for Brian, I didn't think so. In the communications booklet on page 12.
For the Board of Trustees or for the?
Not
No.
it says the communication.
Oh, the
Auditors
page,
communication.
okay.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
what page is that?
12.
On page 12, under vacations, in the top, it says, the recommendation is the director obtaining written approval from the Stefan acting director, and I'm not clear who that
That's
is.
usually Natalia.
So
In the
that's-
past, it's been Natalia, so, or if she's not here, it's usually the next senior department head,
Okay, so
but it's not always Natalia. It's whoever I appoint as acting director.
oh, okay.
So it's not always,
Usually-
I mean, there's nothing in our organizational structure or it has been laid out to the board that says that this is the hierarchy that you need to follow. The reason it's followed that is that Natalia is the employee with the most seniority, is the department head with the most seniority. And so, should, for example, I need to be gone for any length of time and Natalia is not here, it would probably be Helga, because then she comes next in terms of seniority, so that's usually what we're doing is that, so it's not always going to be Natalia. Typically, what we've done is the acting director is appointed by myself, and it's the person who's going to be here during my absence and who has the most seniority. If the board wants some other mechanism in place, let me know and we can.
And you're always, I mean, you always let us know how to do it.
And it seems like it's less of an issue. I mean, there's very few places that I go.
Well, you tell us, but
Yeah, it's, and I understand, you know, their point being is that, I mean, and quite frankly, in practice, I both request and then approve my own vacation. So, and I think that's where that's coming from, is that you are my boss, and so I should be getting approval, though.
It's like signing your own paycheck.
Right, pretty
They
much.
did for 40
So
years.
there's, what they're looking for is just so that the board is aware and that we are aware that this is an area that doesn't necessarily need to be addressed more than it is, but that, that could be an area for potential conflict. You know, and they recognize that, you know, this is not an uncommon practice in any library, of any size, right, frankly, it doesn't even have anything to do with our size, but, yeah, so. That being said, I will be going up to Madison tomorrow. My oldest son tore his meniscus getting out of a car. So I'm going up to be there when he has his surgery, because his girlfriend can't go, because she's a resident and works 80 hours a week and can't take off work to go with it. But anyway, so I will be gone tomorrow, but I will be available by phone and email and text, and so, and I'll only for tomorrow as far as I know.
So you're living at the University of Wisconsin
Yes.
in Madison?
Yeah, well, that's where he works, for the University of Wisconsin Hospital System, so.
Do you need extras with you?
We will, if no one wants, and particularly for Dr. Calamag and Barb, if you want to give those to me, I'm happy to take them. For the rest of you, you are welcome to keep them, and they make great bedtime reading.
Yeah, right?
One way to fall asleep.
We do also post these, now that it's finalized, we'll post it on
I
our
will see someone
website.
else.
Yeah, we'll find each other.
And there's always copies
It's
here.
Hold on.
been interesting.
I know, no reason
Board
to
was in
go
the
to
first couple
executive
years,
session.
but what's her
No.
name?
Anyone wanna make a motion to adjourn?
I will make a motion to.
Last time we had to do one.
Second move.
Okay.